All right, so for children, Christmas is undoubtedly the greatest time of the year. When else are we invited to celebrate somebody else's birthday with a whole pile of our own gifts, while everybody else seems to have a pile of their gifts too? What other party is like this? Maybe the Oscars might be the only one. It's a euphoric time for kids. But as the old adage goes, the hardest part of going up is coming down. For every child that experiences the ecstasy of Christmas, particularly the unwrapping of the anticipated gifts, they must also face the scary and abrupt freefall. That is, the coming down from the chemical high achieved by the cocktail of dopamine and serotonin running like wild stallions through their brains. And the detox is never easy. If you've had children, you know what I'm talking about. It begins often as soon as the last gift is opened. And the first symptom of this coming down is the ugly withdrawal. That is usually produced, made visible to the parents with the declaration, "But I still want more." Sometimes that declaration is rooted in heartbreak and sadness. Regardless of the root system, though, it's never easy for a child to face that moment. Nor is it easy for the parent on far less sleep than is healthy for a human being to muster the energy in that moment to teach. For one of those deep teaching moments on thankfulness and contentment and not being greedy. Because really, what kid is seeking to learn a life lesson in that moment, right? All we're wondering, the poor parent, what else they could have done to prepare the child to quit this Christmas bender, cold turkey, so abruptly. And then only to realize, of course, nothing can be done, and you just have to watch. Let the chips fall where they may, as we could say. Because in this moment, we often aren't dealing with humans anymore. We're dealing with some kind of wild animal, convinced with religious level conviction that they still do want and in fact need more. And so with the help of coffee and perhaps a splash of something a bit stronger, the parent sits back, resigned to their own helplessness, and waits for the withdrawal to pass and the happy boy or girl to return. Now, every parent wishes that this was not such a common Christmas story because it's not appropriate behavior. I mean, if adults behaved like this, you would quickly run out of gift openings to attend, right? The manic behavior isn't acceptable, and part of growing up is learning to not act this way, but instead be grateful and content for what we've been given. But I wonder this morning if I can suggest to you that maybe, unlike parents of an overstimulated child, those parents who just want the child to stop begging and pleading and crying for more, maybe God does in fact want us to want more. Maybe there is an element of the human heart brought alive by the gospel where we should be in a state of wanting, longing, desiring more. I think God does want us to continue to expect. In fact, maybe the gift of Jesus is a gift that is enjoyed best when more and more and more is our desire. Therefore, all of this to say, I want to invite us over the next 4 weeks to consider what it would look like to approach God's gift of His Son, like the kid who opens the present, and still declares with great conviction and unique passion, personal need even, I still want more. Because unlike earthly parents who've often exhausted their emotional and physical resources, their money, their creativity, even their patience, God is never exhausted, ever, by our desperation and our hunger and even our passion for more. Because in Jesus there is always more. There's always more to come. And the Advent themes of hope and joy and peace and love are not just Christmas decorations that we pop up in our homes for 30 days a year, or even gifts of God that were from a season past but forever stuck there. They're not ghosts of Christmas past. There's always more to receive. And for the heart that wants more, these gifts of Advent that we discuss in Advent and consider and reflect on in Advent do continue to occupy our hearts, our minds, our homes, and in fact all of our life, not just a single season. And so today we begin by talking about hope, the first theme in Advent. My intention this morning is twofold. I want to give you some characteristics of hope, but I also want to show you how hope was given, how hope was realized, but then how hope was renewed. So that when it comes to God's gift of Jesus, you would see that it's okay to still want more. We begin in the Old Testament this morning, in the book of Micah. It would have been easy to go to Isaiah 9, but, well, we thought we'd change it up this year. Our first consideration is that hope in the midst of chaos is a comfort for the heart. Micah 5:2 says, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days." It's been said that one of the purposes of the Old Testament prophets was to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Micah, who was a contemporary of the prophet Isaiah, certainly did this. He was a prophet who God used to speak really a three-part message to God's people, to Israel. Micah communicated first what God was upset about. Then he communicated God's certain punishment for the sin of the nation. And then in the thick of that, he spoke hope by predicting the messianic deliverer from the line of a very famous king named David. If you want to know more about the specific sins and sort of the nitty-gritty of what was going on in Israel at the time of Isaiah and Micah, you've got to read it for yourself. It wouldn't take you very long. But my desire in showing you this passage isn't so much to talk about the specific sins, but rather to remind us that hope was first born, first spoken, first given, first arrived in chaos and pain and rebellion and selfishness and even sin. You've heard me say this before. I stole it from Fleming Rutledge, who we'll quote in a little bit. She says that Advent, that is this first whispers of the coming Messiah. Advent begins in the dark. That's where it starts. Which is why a characteristic of hope is that it comforts the person in chaos. It comforts the person in darkness. It comforts the person who is, dare we say, living real life. A person who's not trying to not notice or not feel, but a person who is actually facing each day in a world with atrocities, and a world with disappointments, and questions, and grief. So horrific that even the most imaginative and creative mind couldn't come up with some of this stuff. It is this darkness in which hope comes as a whisper of an answer. A whispered reason in the darkness to not give up. Fleming Rutledge, who I think is just so uniquely gifted, whose Advent book I come back to every Christmas season, and I'm always just blown away by it. I never tire of reading it, and she offers this sobering observation. We'll read it a couple times because it's a little bit long. It might be said of Advent that it is not for the faint of heart. What a great way to start off a Christmas series. Not for the faint of heart. To grasp the depth of the human predicament, one has to be willing to enter into the very worst. This is not the same thing as going to horror films, which are essentially entertainment. Entering into the very worst means giving serious consideration to the most hopeless situations. Then she gives some examples. For instance, a facility for the most profound cases of developmental disability. What hope is there for a ward full of people who will never sit up, walk, speak, or feed themselves? Tourists go to the site of Auschwitz-Birkenau and take pictures. But who can really imagine the smells and sounds of the most depraved of all situations? The tourist can turn away in relief and go to lunch. She continues. The hope we meet coming toward us at Advent, then, is the hope that lies beyond any possible good news that could arise out of the human situation. It must come to us out of the future of God or not at all. Such is the background of the Advent announcement, that bursts upon a world in captivity. Comfort ye, my people, said the prophet Isaiah. It might be said of Advent that it is not for the faint of heart. And if we want to understand the human predicament, we have to be willing to enter into the very worst and give consideration to the very worst. Well, that doesn't sound very much like Christmas at all. How many are going to give that lesson to your kids when they pop the chocolate out of day 1 on December 1st? Now, as you eat that, remember to consider the very worst. And yet hope is spoken in the darkness. And when hope is spoken in the darkness, what is given is a promise of a great reversal. Hope to people who aren't afraid to be honest about the state of the world, because this hope is a message that proclaims that the way it is now, it won't forever be. And the reason that this hope can be and should be trusted, and this is so important, is because it's not of human design. It's not of human creation or human origin. It's not of human creativity or human strength. We've tried that. The world is no better today than it's ever been. And yet we pat ourselves on the back thinking we're so woke and enlightened. The solution is beyond us. It's beyond our world. And yet it's for our world. And this is exactly the specifics of God's message through Micah when he says, "But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth from me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days." This is a message about God's solution to a nation in the thick of it because of their own failure and sin. And throughout the book of Micah, the prophet speaks about Israel's defeat. When you read the beginning of Micah, it's like, well, there's boots on the ground, the troops are coming. And he speaks of their defeat because of the poor choices and the absence of their own personal strength to fix their situation, to redeem themselves at all. But now he speaks differently of a different message, the victory of a Messiah who's bringing a great reversal. And then we see he speaks of Bethlehem rather than Jerusalem. And the significance here in talking about this little place called Bethlehem versus the great city of peace is that Jerusalem has failed to produce God's king, settling time and time again for a king of their own creation, a king that looks like them and does it like them. And then we read that the Bethlehem, this small, insignificant, and humble place, not even big enough to be mentioned in the clans, will produce God's ruler from David's line, but now even better. You see, what is promised here in Micah is that this Messiah is a new beginning, yet he's out of a famous heritage. He's in the fashion, in the style of something that was very good most of the time, but it's better, and it's a new beginning. And all of these promises of God's solution then are given as a comfort for those who are living in a land of darkness, as Isaiah said. And if they will return and remain faithful to God, there is on the horizon a perfect rescuer for them. Advent begins in the dark because hope is always first announced there. And if we're going to, today in 2023, participate in Advent, our practice must be to avoid trying to escape the reality of life by diving into the sentiment and nostalgia and glittery optimism of Hallmark Christmas and trusting in the spirit of Christmas. And so you might ask, well, how do we do that? Well, like Fleming Rutledge says, it's sort of like watching a movie. My observation suggests that there are two types of movie watchers in the world. The not very good ones, I'm joking, that want to escape reality and get lost in a world of make-believe. And those who don't want to escape reality, but want to consider it further, deeply, and perhaps even really feel what it might feel like to go through that. In our house, I would say Chantel probably prefers to escape. And as you probably can imagine, I prefer to really think about it and feel it. Probably because Chantel figured out a lot of the lessons a long time ago and I'm still learning. But if you're the person who likes to escape into the world of make-believe, I have bad news. If Advent was a movie, it is not make-believe. And it's not for the ones who like to escape or avoid. That's Christmas. Oh. He attacked our cultural holiday. Advent, unlike Christmas, actually demands we consider the very worst. Because it's in the very worst that God's promise of deliverance was spoken and arrives and will come again. And that's very good news, by the way. If I have disrupted your Christmas plans, I'm sorry. This is actually good news. This is better. You know, Jesus wasn't the icing on an already super good cake. The cake was bitter and rotten, and we were dying on it. And Jesus gave us a whole new way to be nourished. And he was promised to this world living in darkness, and he comes to heal a nation so steeped in failed leadership and disappointed by the shaky promises of bad kings and a great city of peace that wasn't that at all. And now they're just suffering in sinful rebellion. And to those steeped in real life, Micah speaks the word of comfort. God has a plan, and that plan is a person. He's a ruler from old. He's a ruler for me. And for those of you living in this darkness, he is the light that's dawning. Suddenly hope's given. But praise be to God today that hope is not just a memory, and it's not just a decoration, as I said, that we unbox and dust off and display on our shelves. I think we would all agree we still want more than that. And that's good because we have more than that. The story goes on. Hope is also something that is realized time and time again. And when it is realized, it stills our heart. It gives us pause. Luke records in chapter 2 of his gospel, in all of the busyness, we could say, of the birth of Jesus, we get this little verse where it says that Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. That verse comes in the Christmas narrative, basically between what we know about the shepherds. And the gospel writers never do anything by accident. There's always intention. And I think it's really cool that Luke drops this verse of stillness into what we could say was the busyness or even the excitement, which is fine, but was certainly there of the shepherds. The shepherds are talking a lot. They're talking to each other. What does this mean? Let's go see it. They're working together. After they see Jesus, they leave and they're praising God and they're evangelizing and They're very vocal, and this is all very good. And then Mary drops in the middle of it, and she's silent. She's pondering. When our kids were born, Chantel had to spend a couple nights in the hospital both times. And the end of visiting hours, I would leave the hospital and I would return really to normal life. Back to our house, back to our bed, our kitchen. I'd run some errands. I'd play video games with my younger brothers, the important grown-up adult stuff that I had to take care of. When our youngest, Macy, was born, I was also left in charge of our 3.5-year-old Ella, who was incredibly overtired, and her life had been disrupted, and was not very kind to me. But that's for another time. But I was directly in the ordinary rhythms of life, and Chantel was not. She was stuck in a hospital. And I'm certain she would have traded places with me, and I understand why, except for 2 tiny details. The moment she spent alone with our brand new daughters, that I never had. And there was a lot to learn, and there was plenty of crying, and there were diapers that needed changing, and there were nurses in and out, and interruptions, and bad sleep, and all those things. I know that there were moments of stillness. These moments when Chantel held in her arms these little lives that we had hoped for. And so you can imagine she looks at our babies' faces, and she looks at their ears and their noses and the shape of their mouths. She counts their fingers and their toes again and again and again, looks at their hair, the color of it, the thickness of it or lack thereof. And she discovers in those precious moments of bonding the uniqueness of God's gift to her and I. And it's quite possible that Chantel will never again literally hold, examine, and learn about an object of personal hope realized. You stare at, promise fulfilled. A moment when hope realized stills her heart. All of the fear and all of the chaos and all of the new things that come with being a mom. All the demands of cruel nurses. I'm joking. I often imagine Mary's early moments and days with Jesus to be something like this. A moment in which Mary's heart is still. And while all the busyness and hurriedness goes on around her, she ponders the significance of the precious gift of God that her infant son was to her and Joseph. And for Mary, this was an even deeper treasuring than any mom could possibly understand because of the significance of that son. And all of the events that had led to this moment. Mary is visited by an angel. The baby in her is conceived when she is overshadowed by the Holy Spirit. Her son's presence causes cousin John to leap in his mother's womb. Elizabeth declares, you're blessed because God has kept his word to you. You've believed. She's been told that her son will be the savior of his people, that he's the promised Messiah. And so we can imagine as Mary looks at that hope fulfilled, she has much to ponder and much to treasure. It had been for her, to her, as God has spoken. And in this moment of realized hope, she watches and she treasures the promise of God, sleeping and crying and eating and being so very much alive. All right before her eyes. And so as I said, her response is different than the shepherds. We don't get it recorded that in this moment Mary praises God. We have a real lengthy, what we call the Magnificat, where she praises God. But in this moment, it's just still. Hope's realized. Now, if we were to stop the story here, what we have is the promise of the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament, Micah, Isaiah. And then with it in Luke, hope is given. And the promise of God to Mary, really for the world, it comes to pass. Hope's realized. But if that's the end of the story, if it all ends with the birth of Jesus, if it all ends with the unwrapping of the gift, then we should be left going, well, that kind of was anticlimactic at the end of the day. And like every person knows, it's not just receiving the gift that makes it special. It's using the gift, it's playing with the gift, it's enjoying the purpose of the gift, and it's learning the intention often that a gift was given with. Why did you give me this? Why did you think of me when you gave me that? And so for the next 33 years, Mary would watch the gift grow in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. She would watch the gift teach and heal and deliver. She would watch this gift die like a criminal and then rise in triumph as a king. And every step of the way, hope wasn't just a memory for her and an old story to tell when she got together for tea with the girls. Hope continued to invite Mary and countless others to want more. More. I still want more. Which is exactly what should have happened. Because though hope realized will still the heart, hope is always so true in God's kingdom. There's always this other side of it. And hope also excites the heart. Especially when it's renewed and it's made fresh again. So we jump to the Apostle Peter, who in his epistle says this in verse 3 and then 13. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Bless the name of the Lord. According to his mercy, he's caused us to be born again into what? Living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Oh, he didn't even really mention the birth of Jesus. He mentioned our birth and the resurrection of Jesus. And then he goes on, verse 13, therefore with minds that are alert and fully sober, do what? Set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. Set your hope on the grace that is still ahead. Paul says in Ephesians that no eye has seen, no ear has heard what God's prepared for those who love him. And we get a little taste of that here in Peter. Set your hope on the grace that is still being brought to you. Paul says elsewhere that the gospel was grace given in place of grace already given. The law was an act of grace, and then the gospel is a gift of grace, and there is grace still to be brought. Grace upon grace upon grace. And so if hope in the birth of Jesus and hope in his deliverance, as surprising as it may have been, was all that God's gift of Jesus brought, then today, those of us who have lived in this church age, we're just hoping in something that already happened, which actually isn't hope at all. That's nostalgia. Hope is always about waiting and watching for something still to come with confident expectation. And that's an important part, confident expectation. It's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm hoping for that too, and inwardly being like, but not really. Confident expectation. And that's why Peter says two very important things about hope. First of all, he says that we've been born again into a hope that is alive, a living hope. And then he says, and we are to set our hope on the grace that's still on the way. Peter teaches that our hope is renewed, and we still have reason to be excited. We are to set our hope not on what was, but what will be, on what is still to come, on the glory that will be revealed, on the grace that we haven't known yet. And you see, we have a living hope, not a memory of hope, not an example of hope, a living hope. We don't have a story of hope realized a long time ago for Middle Eastern people, but we have a living hope. And you know what that means? It means that for those who've been saved by faith, there is a gift that comes by way of the Holy Spirit's ministry where we grow in eager, confident expectation of the life that is still to come. And as Peter says, this hope is living, which means that it continues to grow and increase in size and strength, and we can even say appetite. And in addition to increasing in size and strength year after year, this hope invites us to do something even with ourselves. We could say check ourselves or check our progress or see how we're doing. Check our maturity as disciples. Wayne Grudem says this: if such a growing hope is the expected result, hear that? Expected result. Growing hope, an expected result of being born again, then perhaps to the degree to which believers have an intense, confident expectation of the life to come is one useful measure of progress toward Christian maturity. In other words, your hope of the future may be the litmus test for your Christian walk, for your discipleship. He goes on to say it is not surprising that such a hope is particularly evident in many older Christians as they approach death. I think this makes a lot of sense because if we don't really understand the beauty of Jesus, the grace, the love, the rescue, the power, the perfection, in contrast and comparison to our wretchedness, then why would the return of the King spark any sense of anticipation in us? Bigger than like when we hear a distant relative is coming to town, it might be sort of interesting or amusing. We're not particularly excited. In other words, if we don't understand the gifts of Jesus and the realization of hope in the cross and resurrection, then why would we ever long for more? It's like I said last week, if you don't understand the grace of God because you're wretched, you won't be gracious to other people. You'll be blaming, you'll be criticizing, you'll be controlling, you'll be demanding, and you'll never take correction because you think it's still about perfection. If we don't understand the hope in the cross and the resurrection, then why would we ever anticipate a greater grace in the return of Jesus? But for the person who does know and does learn and then does grow in this, then it's not only natural for us to exclaim time and time again, I still want more, but it's almost just reactionary, responsive, because this hope is alive, it's living, and it gets us excited. It makes us desire more. Not contentment for what has been, or avoidance of what today might be, but anticipation for the Jesus who is coming again, and the grace we haven't yet seen. And this, dear church, is the purpose of Advent. The final point I want to make as we conclude, that Advent is actually about the second coming of Christ. I thought this was a Christmas series. Karl Barth, Swiss theologian, said, what other time or season can or will the church ever have but that of Advent? Advent means anticipation, expectance of an arrival. What other season will the church ever live in but anticipating the Jesus who is coming again? So Advent isn't really about Christmas as we know Christmas to be. Rather, it is about drawing us to the details in God's story pertaining to Christ's first coming, his first Advent, in order to help us prepare our hearts for his second. And for far too many Christians, we either know nothing about Advent, choosing the nostalgia and optimism and spirit of Christmas instead, or we use Advent as, I think this is so true of evangelicals. I'll just speak for myself, but I think when I was younger, Advent was like this tool to help us build up this feeling of anticipation. Feeling of anticipation for Christmas morning. So that when Christmas morning comes, or Christmas Eve if you're German, and the climax of the Christmas season is upon us, then it will have some Christian meaning because we've thought a lot about hope and peace and joy and love. And so we spend each Sunday rehearsing the birth of Jesus so that when we open our presents, our kids have a concept of what we're remembering and celebrating and why. And of course that's good and important. Of course we remember that Jesus is born, and that's good. And it's special. And we want to point our kids to God's gift of his Son. And of course as adults we should be reflecting on the child born and the Son given to a people living in a land of darkness. But that's not actually the purpose of Advent. Advent is about anticipating the second coming. And we do so by reflecting on what God has done in the confidence that he will do something like that again. And that's why Advent is not just a liturgical word for Christmas. Advent and Christmas aren't synonyms. They're different. Sometimes I think we treat it like high church uses the term Advent, but us blue-collar evangelicals, we just say Christmas. We don't speak Latin. But it's not true. You see, we celebrate Christmas in the season of Advent. We celebrate Christmas in the season of Advent. And today, then, we begin this month of heart, mind, and soul preparation, in which we reflect deeply on the Christ who has come, yes, because we believe in hope that he is coming again. And we want to be found with our lamps still burning.